Well, welcome, my friends, to the Versed podcast. My name is John. This is a daily pursuit to become more perceptive to what the Bible says. And today we're going to be reading 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 18. All right, so we are looking at a snapshot in the life of King David in today's reading. And it's said in the Bible that he was a man after God's own heart. Have you ever thought about what that looks like? Well, we will certainly see one example of it today. David gives us the playbook on how we should respond when God says no to our plans. So like we do every podcast, we're going to look at some historical and cultural context to what we are reading before we read it. It's always important. So the majority of the action today, recorded in 2 Samuel and 1 Samuel, there are two books, 1 and 2 Samuel. These took place in and around the Central Highlands in the land of Israel. The books span about 135 years of history. King Saul, who reigned from 1052 to 1011 BC, and then David, who was the king of the United Monarchy from 1011 to 971 BC. The Israelites at this time believed in God for the most part and would obey him. But God for them was very remote. He was more like a boss in their mind. Why? At this time, they were at a low point spiritually. The priesthood was corrupt. Judges were dishonest. Their hearts were far from God. And it was represented in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was a chest overlaid with gold, two cherubim facing each other over it. It housed the tablets that had the Ten Commandments on them. The Israelites had this ark with them as they wandered in the wilderness. They carried it into battle. It was the only, I guess you could call, piece of furniture that was in the tabernacle, which was essentially a tent or a place of worship for people. So the ark represented and was the presence of God in the middle of his people. And because they treated the ark like an idol and God like some magical force, they lost the ark. They actually physically lost it, and it resided in a remote place on the border of Israel with the land of the Philistines. And it remained there during Saul's reign, who was the predecessor to David, as we just learned. So David felt called to change this. The ark was far from the people. God was far from the hearts of the people. And one of the first things he did as king was to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. It was very significant. He wanted the people to bring God back to the center of their lives. Bringing the ark back, though, wasn't enough. It didn't end up bringing revival or renewal that David had hoped for. So David wanted to build a temple. He wanted to build a house for the presence of God. He wanted the presence of God and the glory and the beauty of the temple to be so intense that the people couldn't deny it. So David goes to Nathan, the prophet, and says, "Hey, I want to do this." And David says, "Awesome, go for it." That night, God spoke to Nathan and said, "David's not the one. He's not going to build this temple." This wasn't because David did anything wrong, by the way. There was no judgment on David. So David was faced to deal with God's no, accepting it, living with the mystery of what God wanted. So David gets this word, and then today's verse is where we pick up in the story and see David's response. So let's prepare to read 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 18. Then King David went in and sat before the Lord, and he said, "Who am I, O sovereign Lord, and what is my family, that you have brought me this far?" David was in his prime, you could say. Early 30s-ish, around my age, actually. Not that I'm in my prime, but he's young. He's strong. He's got a vision. His mind is sharp. His spirit's on fire. He's got energy. He's been tested. He's mature. He's got the trust and admiration of his people. He's the king. He's got everything at his disposal. And he was given a no. Something he rarely got, I'm sure. I'm sure he was overwhelmed with the vision for the future that was not his own vision for the future. David's response to God was not to pout, not to get angry, not to give up on the relationship or tell God that he's wrong. He went in where the Ark of the Covenant was, in the tabernacle, a visual representation of what David wanted to do for God, and sat before the Lord. The king sat before God. David, with devout affection, deliberately and reverently placed himself before his king, and he accepts the no. It makes me think, do I have that same posture? Do you have that same posture? Is your heart in that posture? I'll tell you today, if that is not the testimony of your own heart, to come before God with that affection and reverence and humility, if you don't have that posture, then you have not yet seen the depth of your sin. You haven't seen the grace and the kindness of God. So let's take some time together today and reflect on that. Go to God in that posture. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, take this intentional time while I keep the music rolling to pray, to meditate on what was revealed today, and then we'll come back on the other side. Well, guys, as always, thank you for checking out the Verse Podcast. I hope it is encouraging you and helping you grow deeper in your faith. If you would like resources to dive deeper into your own study, I encourage you to do that. Those are linked in the show notes, as well as a link to my social media where we can connect there. I would love to connect with you. And I will make one ask for you, if you don't mind. If you haven't yet, leave a rating and a review on the podcast wherever you're listening. That helps the podcast grow. And make sure you follow the podcast if you haven't yet, so it drops in your feed every day. All right, guys, have a good one. Make hope louder today. We'll talk tomorrow.